Yeah, hi there, this is tuxoche.com again. Welcome on my video channel. And in today's little video, I want to talk about Exposure X5. That comes from a software company formerly known as Alien Skin Software. And they released their RAW converter X5, I guess 10 or 14 days ago. And I downloaded a trial version to check this RAW converter. Exposure X5 is available both for Macintosh and Windows systems, costs around $119, and there is a 30-day trial version available, so you can try out the software first. Exposure X5 is mentioned by others as a Lightroom competitor, and so we just go into the laptop and see how much functions and useful items Exposure X5 will offer to you. Okay, maybe you start to wonder when we talk about exposure software, why we start in Lightroom. But like almost every RAW converter, you have the opportunity to use Exposure X5 as an external editor for Lightroom. But another thing is, if we go here to plugin extras, you find a menu item migrate catalog to exposure. If you call this, you can choose from different migrate options. But let's take a look first on the website, which items are migrated. That is, of course, the image, the keywords, and the collections. And here you see what is recognized by exposure, that is image orientation and so forth, and collection sets. But here you find a list what is not exported or migrated into exposure, that are mainly editing options from Lightroom. To make the migration a little bit easier, you can choose to export a copy either in TIFF or JPEG format to the exposure catalog, so you have a sort as reference for the new development after you migrated to exposure. Okay, now we are in Exposure X5, and like most of the programs, you have the navigator, the histogram, the folders which you can add additional folders to read in. We got here the presets, and on the other side all the settings for image processing, and here the metadata, including here the keywords which were migrated from a Lightroom catalog. Here you see I would take this one, like for example, here you can see the keywords added to this image, and we can add at any time here another keyword to this image, and now it's also in the keyword library. We can select all to display a full list of all ever used keywords in the exposure catalog. Takes quite a while, and here you got all the keywords which were migrated in this case from the Lightroom catalog. If you might think that is a little bit overloaded here from all the items, first of all you have a so-called solo mode, which you might know from Lightroom. It's the same thing, only the one where you click on is expanded in this case. And additionally you have the customize panel option, where you can define sort of your own GUI. If you're, let's say, used to that the navigator is on the right side and not on the left, you just drag it over to here, and here you see the navigator, like this one. You also can disable certain development settings here, which you don't use very often or not at all. Like let's take for example here the bokeh function. You just click on it and it is not available anymore until you reset the customization. Another option is to sort this development settings. Just take other, like focus and grain. If you use those filters seldomly, you could move them down to the end of the list. And for example, if you want to have a fast look on metadata, get that to the beginning of the list. That would be possible too. The only thing that doesn't work might be a question for improvements in the next version. Okay, we cancel this here. You have quite a lot of presets here. You see that list that are all presets for development or starting a development, and you can customize the panels, but what you can't do is select some of those filters and disable them if you don't use them at all, like color film slide or Polaroid or some effects like this. It's only possible to either disable the presets all or enable them. In contrast to Lightroom, you don't have a separate development module. It's just all in one place. So you can start right away with the development of the image. Here you find the basics like exposure, contrast, highlights and so on. Here for sharpening and noise reduction, color for saturation and so on. It's everything there that you need. There are some other filters where you can simulate unsharp areas called bokeh. You see that's an effect you can also do in Photoshop. What they newly added in Exposure X5 is lens correction to minimize distortion and chromatic aberration. And you have here a transform section where you can vertically or horizontally flip the image, mainly to adjust lines in architectural photography. Exposure X5 also offers layers. You can here add a layer, and if you want to, let's say, apply a gradient filter to the image, you have to work with the layers. Exposure X5 can do that without a layer. Okay, here we got the gradient. Just walk on top a little bit, make it a little bit smaller to just have the sky in here, and then we can go down with the exposure a little bit, which then will only affect, of course, the layer section. The layers are not compatible to Photoshop, and if you use Exposure X5 as an external editor for Lightroom, you have to save images where you work with layers separately, because as a plugin there is a TIFF re-imported into Lightroom, and that doesn't contain any layers. Okay, Exposure X5 of course has the opportunity to export the image with the export dialog. Here you can choose where the final exported image is stored at. Here you can choose the naming of the exported file, and here in which file format, either JPEG or TIFF. You can choose if you want to include all metadata or if you want to remove location info and keywords, and you can add a watermark which is editable in Exposure X5. And last but not least, you can of course resize the image during export. Then there are a couple quick export presets, you could call them, for social media. And of course you have the opportunity to define your own customized export profile. You just add it here, name it, let's say, it's for now test. Let's say for JPEG high quality and so on. And the next time you switch to the quick export menu, you get your own profile here. And of course, Exposure X5 helps you with the organization. If we pull down that one, you see here already a collection that was there imported or migrated from Lightroom. But of course you can add other collections where you manually place images into, and Exposure X5 has the ability to define smart collections. Here you could choose like where the rating is at least 3 and take all the images took with a Canon. Oh, forgot the name. Let's rename that test. Okay, here we got at least the collection of all images captured with a Canon camera. You see, it's not as sophisticated like Lightroom, but I guess it's enough for regular organization of your images and collections. Okay, as you could see, Exposure X5 offers a lot of functions and even offers a Lightroom migration, so you can take over all the keywords and other metadata from your images to a new Exposure X5 catalog. The only thing they can't take over is most of the image processing parameters, but I think that's not badly done. As you could see, I did use it for migrating a catalog with around 800 images just to test it, and it did a pretty good job. And if you have complicated processing done on your images, you might as well export a 16-bit TIFF alongside to have a reference image to newly process the image. Even as data management is not as sophisticated as Lightroom, but still pretty usable, does a pretty good job. You can add keywords, and as soon as you add them there in the catalog, you can manage your collections, and you even have smart collection where you can filter for different keywords, different metadata like camera, lens or something else. So that should be enough in the first place to manage your images. There are a couple things missing if you compare it to Lightroom, like for example, you don't have functions for stitching or merging HDR or panorama images. And another thing, on my Canon 60 Mark II, the GPS data written into the RAW files is not displayed as metadata, but if you go into the subfolder of where the image is in, there you probably find a XMP file which contains the GPS data, so that data is not lost. And maybe in a later version of Exposure X5 they will add a map module or something like that, or at least that you could click Google Maps or so to find the position where the image was captured. And talking about a little bit overloaded, what's very positive is that you can customize the panels a lot to your personal workflow and just like you like it the best. The only thing is that the filters or presets which come with Exposure X5 cannot be selected out. You either have all presets or no one at all. I think it would be better to at least mark a couple of groups to not having them in the panel when you know that those effects or presets you will use in your image processing. The same is true for all the settings in the panel for development. That is pretty long, and even if you use the solo mode, I use it here on a laptop with the resolution of 1920 by 1080, and that's not really enough space, though I would prefer it if they split up the development module in a separate module and take as a start sort of library mode like you know it in Lightroom. Even though the behavior is a lot different to Lightroom, you don't have to import the images at first, but I think that will make things a little bit easier. Okay, that was my view on Exposure X5. It might be an alternative to you, even if you're a Lightroom user, if you don't like the subscription model, or stick around with the old version Lightroom 6.14. Then you could download a trial version either for Mac or for Windows and check out if this fits your need. So that is all from me for today. I would like, if you like this video, and even more if you subscribe the channel, and if you subscribe it, make sure that you hit the notify bell so you get a notification every time I upload a new video. If you have any questions about Exposure X5, you might place them in the comments or in the comments of the corresponding blog post, and I will try to answer them. And so that's all for today, and I have to say, till next time, ciao, tux oche.